When I was 14, I planned my wedding.
This one's wife, defeat and cash-strapped. There is repeated speculation about the financial circumstances of the Sussexes. There is no doubt that they found themselves in a position of wealth as a consequence of Harry's existing millions, his recent inheritance, and the monies that were received as a consequence of the Spotify and Netflix contracts. Whilst those amounts were not as large as first envisaged, there's no doubt that they found themselves in a multi-million-dollar situation. However, they also have high overheads. They have a mortgage on an expensive property. They have property taxes. There are PR puff pieces that must be paid for. They have an extensive staff that must be paid for, both in terms of those that work for Archewell and those that work for the Sussexes in a private and personal capacity, such as nannies, cleaners, gardeners, and so forth. There is the ongoing cost of security, which is substantial. The transport costs that are associated with the places that they go. And as we have seen, they have sought to have those costs covered by Archewell and utilising other people's money to that end, along with the fact that they have also sought to get taxpayer funding for their security. There's also the issue of the fact that neither of the gruesome twosome have proper jobs. With this one's wife and Harry's Netflix contract winding down, with the suspicion that either it won't be renewed or it will be on reduced terms, so Netflix can be hanging around in readiness for the divorce bombshells, the suggestion is that there isn't a lot coming in. This one's wife's Potemkin business, as ever, isn't generating any money whatsoever because it's not actually about selling anything, it's about creating a shop window with the deluded expectation through her magical thinking that somebody will come along and make her a multi-million-dollar bid for the brand, even though it hasn't sold a single item. With this situation, it's not difficult to see that the existing pile of money is dwindling and dwindling fast, with no offers on the horizon, no Fashon, houses interested in this one's wife, no cosmetics giants beating apart at her door, Harry arsing around with Better Up and Travellist, which presumably don't pay him a massive amount, and substantial overheads. The picture looks rather bleak. But also, throw into the mix the legal costs of Harry's campaign as the Dragon Slayer against associated newspapers. And more information that was revealed in this court case demonstrates that the cash-strapped position could be about to get even worse, and that he may well be staring defeat in the face. As part of the litigation, it is the case that the parties are obligated to provide what is known as a statement of costs. This is where both sides' solicitors estimate what the costs of the proceedings are going to be, broken down by the various stages. And this assists with regard to the question of proportionality, with regard to the sums that are in issue, in terms of what the amount of money is that is being fought over, and also with regard to the level of recoverability that might be applied in respect of those costs. For instance, if a party exceeds that cost estimate significantly, there may be difficulties in recovering the excess costs. It's also a guide so that the parties have an idea of what either side's costs are to assist them in making a judgment about whether they wish to proceed. For instance, knowing that you could be on the hook for 60 to 70% of your opponent's costs, and if those costs are many millions of pounds, you might think twice about wanting to proceed with the litigation and be more moved towards settlement, which of course is something that parties are naturally encouraged to do pursuant to the civil procedure rules that govern proceedings in England and Wales. The Daily Telegraph has shared some of this information, which is clearly obtained from a statement of costs, which tells us something about the costs that are being incurred by the parties. Apparently, the hourly rate claimed by Associated Newspapers Grade A solicitors, namely those with more than 8 years of experience, is £740 per hour. The combined total of the claimant's proposed budget, which is the Duke of Sussex, Elton John, Baroness Lawrence, David Furnish, Sadie Frost, Liz Hurley and Simon Hughes, is 18.7 million. It's unclear how that is divvied up, whether it's equal amongst those 7 or so individuals, which would mean that they're in for something in the region of £2 million each, or whether certain parties have agreed to bear a greater level of the cost. I shouldn't imagine, for instance, that Doreen Lawrence would necessarily be in a position to meet a £2 million bill for her lawyers, and it might be that other people are helping her out. It's also the case that Associated Newspapers' proposed budget is 19.8 million, therefore not too dissimilar from that of the claimants. And the fact is that this means that potentially, if Harry loses this case, not only does he have to pay his share of the claimant's proposed budget, which could be anything £2 million and above, but he could also be on the hook for a similar amount with regard to the opposition costs should he lose his case. Furthermore, it is likely to be the case that unless the judge directs to the contrary, if Associated Newspapers wins the case and successfully defends it, they might choose who to enforce a costs order against. So, for instance, they may look at it and think that Baroness Lawrence doesn't have a lot of money and therefore she's not worth pursuing. They may conclude, and I don't know what the personal financial circumstances are of Sadie Frost or Liz Hurley or Simon Hughes, but they might decide that there are bigger targets, namely Elton John and Harry, and therefore they seek the lion's share of the costs from them, which potentially means that Harry might be on the hook for several £million. Furthermore, we don't know, for instance, if there is any agreement whereby he could recoup that money from the other claimants in the event that he's targeted by the defendants to pay the costs. There might not be such an arrangement. But the fact is, litigation of this nature is very expensive, and this information is demonstrative of not only how much does Harry have to fork out for his own lawyers, but what he might be on the hook should he lose this case. And believe me, these are just estimates, and trials invariably are horrendously expensive and could increase these estimates further. But there's also another nugget of information which perhaps gives us some insight that Harry could well lose this case. As part of the cost estimate, the claimant's proposed budget for settlement negotiations is a very specific £216,669, meaning that's the money they've set aside for perhaps undertaking mediation, preparing for mediation, back and forth settlement negotiations between all of the various parties. What's the budget that the Daily Mail's publisher has placed for settlement? Nothing. Zero. That's interesting, because that suggests that they are not interested in settlement. Now, whilst the parties do have an obligation to consider settlement, the fact that they've not allocated a budget for it either means they've got some big round balls, or they are actually, based on legal advice, entirely confident about defeating this case, meaning we don't need to settle it, we're content to go to trial because we know we're going to win. Which, if that is indicative of their position and the likelihood of success, it means that Harry could well therefore be staring defeat in the face, with substantial legal bills to follow thereafter, and given the straitened circumstances of the gruesome twosome, that's certainly not going to go down well with his handler. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.